really interesting. I mean, sadly the pandemic has had an impact on a lot of young people's lives, but those skills and experiences of, that normal type are absolutely
The British royal family has been rocked to its core following a deeply emotional interview in which Prince Edward revealed decades of personal struggles hidden behind palace walls. Speaking candidly for the first time about the pain of living in the shadow of his brother, Edward recounted the pressures of his childhood and the lasting impact on his adult life, leaving the nation in shock. Amid this revelation, one question grips millions. What finally compelled him to speak out? The disclosure came as a profound shock, difficult to process even for those trying to prepare themselves, and has left many grappling with sadness. In a recent documentary celebrating Queen Elizabeth's life and reign, Edward's confession sent waves across the United Kingdom. On the day of the interview, he entered the studio with composure, though subtle tension in his posture and the tightness around his eyes betrayed his unease. Sophie, noticing this, reached for his hand in quiet reassurance, which Edward acknowledged with a faint nod, yet the sense of discomfort lingered. As cameras rolled and lights flickered, the crew moved with hushed efficiency. The set, designed to honor the Queen's decades of service, was meant as a celebration, yet Edward's revelations cast a heavy shadow over the proceedings. This was not merely a reflection on the public triumphs of a monarch. It was a rare glimpse into the private currents that had shaped the royal family behind palace walls. The interview began gently, with customary questions about the Queen's accomplishments, and Edward answered with courtesy and care. His voice remained steady, yet those attuned to subtleties could sense the strain beneath it, particularly as the conversation shifted toward the Queen's life beyond the public eye. Pausing, he drew a deep breath, his gaze drifting as though reaching back into memory, and then he revealed something extraordinary. A private conversation shared with the Queen near the end of her life. In that intimate, unguarded moment, she had entrusted him with a profound task: to preserve the emotional bonds among her children, her grandchildren, and the family itself. It was not merely a symbolic duty, but a charge to safeguard the heart of the family, requiring vigilance, patience, and courage. As he spoke, decades of buried emotion surfaced. He admitted feeling that he had failed in this promise, tears slipping unbidden as he recounted family fractures, the relentless pressure of duty, and wounds left unspoken. Memories of quiet evenings with the Queen, of her stories, her wisdom, and her presence, mingled with the isolation of watching siblings navigate public triumphs and disappointments while he remained in the shadows. Edward reflected on the strain of expectation, the missed moments of laughter, unspoken conversations, and honesty that might have healed but never had. His words evolved from reflection to revelation, questioning whether the monarchy had demanded too much perfection, too much polish, and suggesting that perhaps humanity should be allowed alongside tradition. In exposing his own vulnerability, he revealed a different kind of strength, one rooted in courage, honesty, and the dignity of acknowledging the heart's quiet truths. Acknowledging imperfection through tears, Edward shared a quiet yet profound vision for the future. A monarchy where relationships mattered more than appearances, where voices could be heard without fear, and where emotional honesty could coexist with centuries-old tradition. He admitted he had not fully succeeded, but speaking these truths marked a step forward, a bridge toward repair, understanding, and the slow rekindling of family warmth. As the cameras recorded, he paused, breathing in the moment, feeling the weight of decades lift slightly, while Sophie squeezed his hand in silent support. The studio remained hushed, yet his confession resonated far beyond its walls, touching viewers who had never imagined seeing a royal so unguarded. Though the interview ended, Edward's words lingered, offering the nation a glimpse of a prince stripped of pretense, wrestling openly with regret, longing, and hope. He showed that vulnerability was not weakness, that imperfection could coexist with duty, and that humanity mattered as much as tradition. For Edward, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, a moment of reckoning and clarity that would shape his path and, perhaps over time, influence the family he had vowed to protect. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, he sensed a subtle shift. The confession had not healed all fractures nor resolved decades of tension, but it had opened a space for truth, dialogue, and connection. He knew the journey ahead was long, that quiet storms still raged behind palace doors. Yet, as he reflected on the challenges he had faced, it became clear that Prince Edward, long regarded as the quietest, most reserved member of the royal family, had chosen a moment of profound honesty, revealing a pain long hidden and confronting a legacy of silence in a way that stunned the public. That it was unexpected, almost unbelievable. To see Prince Edward, who had spent more than 60 years cultivating a reputation for calmness, reveal a side of himself so raw and human. For the first time, he allowed the world to glimpse the toll that recent years had taken on him. He did not dramatize his feelings or make a show of his struggles. He spoke simply, honestly, and quietly, a simplicity that made the moment all the more powerful. Viewers later described it as witnessing a man step out of the long shadow cast by both his family and his own sense of duty. The public's reaction was swift. People who had rarely noticed him before suddenly recognized the sadness that had always lingered behind his polite smile. Many began revisiting footage of Edward at state events, family gatherings, and charity visits, comparing the composed figure they remembered with the man now speaking, and found an unmistakable change. A new depth of sorrow had settled in his eyes, revealing just how invisible he had been for much of his life. As the youngest child, he had rarely been in the spotlight, following his brother's footsteps through Gordonstoun School and Cambridge University, while maintaining a role that was quietly supportive. He was dependable, steady, and scandal-free, a glue holding the family together, but beneath that calm exterior, something had been building for years. Even as he carried out his royal duties with diligence, a subtle shift in his posture and demeanor hinted at the weight he bore. Sources close to Edward revealed that much of this pressure stemmed from his deep concern for Queen Elizabeth II. He had watched her endure the relentless demands of her role for decades, performing over 15,000 official engagements while maintaining the dignity and composure expected of a monarch, and the sight of her unwavering dedication had left its mark on him, shaping both his sense of duty and the quiet burden he carried for so long even in her 90s. Queen Elizabeth II continued her duties with unwavering dedication, performing thousands of engagements and modeling a steadfast strength that Edward, her closest child, tried to emulate. Yet the more he sought to mirror her calm and resilience, the heavier the weight of her example became on his shoulders. After her passing, Edward quietly vowed to do his best to keep the family united, to preserve the bonds she had nurtured for decades. The United Kingdom observed 10 days of mourning, with nearly 250,000 people queuing to pay their respects, and Edward felt the magnitude of both duty and loss. Each passing month reminded him of the cost of his vow. He woke daily with the unsettling sense that something precious was slipping away, powerless to stop it. Subtle shifts in family dynamics soon grew more pronounced: fewer shared photographs, fewer public appearances together, and diminished communication across branches of the family. Insiders noted that the warmth that once filled a room when the Queen entered had vanished, and disagreements that had once been manageable now carried real consequences. Edward watched tensions rise between Charles, William, Harry, and himself, as debates about the monarchy's future added new pressures. Long seen as the quiet, dependable presence, Edward now confronted the weight of family expectations, public scrutiny, and decades of invisible self-restraint. The rift between William and Harry echoed worldwide, with surveys showing waning public trust in their bond, while Edward faced his own quiet struggles, burdens that affected not only the family's public image, but the emotional connections within it. Meanwhile, King Charles contended with his own challenges, compounding the strain on a family already grappling with change. Edward navigated the monarchy at a time when fewer royals were actively working, and public demand for openness and transparency was growing. Each member faced their own storm, and each storm added another layer of tension to the atmosphere he moved through daily. He observed it all in silence, never arguing, never taking sides, simply absorbing the strain. With every passing day, the weight inside him grew heavier. Doors were closed, arrivals carefully timed, and conversations strictly controlled, turning the palace, a place that had once felt like home, into something resembling a museum, where everyone moved cautiously, so as not to disturb the fragile quiet. What hurt him most was not public crises, but the private atmosphere, the unspoken distance between people that cut deepest. He walked through rooms where echoes of laughter lingered, yet the present felt tense and fragile. Looking at portraits of the Queen, he felt both comfort and pressure, thinking of her calmness, her steadiness, and her gift for bringing people together, and he wondered why he could not create the same harmony. That quiet, persistent question became the seed of his slow breaking point, a gradual internal shift, almost invisible from the outside. Edward's struggle was not a single moment of collapse, but a long, accumulating weight. His childhood had set the stage for this sensitivity. As the quietest child in the royal household, Edward had always observed rather than competed. While Charles drew attention as heir, and moved confidently through every room. Edward preferred to step back, listen, and take in the world around him. His quietness was often mistaken for shyness, but it reflected a deeper sensitivity. Noticing subtle tensions, the exhaustion of staff, or the hidden burdens his mother carried as she balanced her crown. These habits shaped him into a reflective, observant figure, and his closeness with Queen Elizabeth grew naturally from this awareness. She understood him intuitively, sensing his inner turbulence even when he said nothing, and he found comfort in her presence, especially when the palace felt heavy with expectation and restraint. When the palace felt overwhelming with expectations, Edward would stay near the Queen because her presence made the environment lighter and safer. During an interview, he revealed that she had once told him she knew he saw the world differently, a gift meant to encourage him, yet one that felt both a blessing and a burden even in childhood. As he grew older, Edward wrestled with his place in the royal hierarchy. The order was clear. Charles was the future king and had built a strong identity of her own, and Edward often felt like an extra piece in a set that already seemed complete. He did not want to compete. He sought a path that suited his quiet, observant nature, but defining that path proved far more difficult than anyone imagined. His struggles were subtle, persistent, and constant. In his early 20s, he joined the Royal Marines but left training after just 4 months, prompting merciless media criticism over his stamina. Later, he ventured into television production with Ardent, only to face further scrutiny when his programs failed to achieve high ratings and an incident arose involving filming near Prince William at university, contrary to palace guidance. Each misstep was magnified by his position, and every headline chipped away at his confidence. Meeting Sophie transformed his life. She understood his gentleness and provided him with emotional safety, seeing him as more than a background figure. Their wedding in 1999, watched by over 200 million people worldwide, did not overwhelm him because Sophie stood beside him, offering a presence that allowed him to finally feel seen, respected, and held in a way the public never could. With Sophie, Edward discovered a partner who could navigate the pressures of royal life while grounding him in a sense of personal belonging. Edward found balance with Sophie, building a life where he could fully be himself. Together, they supported charities quietly but meaningfully, making tangible changes far from the media glare. Observers, including his siblings, noticed how relaxed he had become. The gentle, soft parts of him finally had space to breathe. Yet comparisons never stopped. Charles continued his public duties, completing more than 500 engagements over several years, maintaining the image of a tireless future king. Edward, meanwhile, worked quietly, hoping that the world would one day recognize the importance of even the quieter members of the family. His insecurities never controlled him, though they surfaced whenever cameras pressed too close or critics measured him against his siblings. Then came the loss that shattered him, the death of Queen Elizabeth. Her passing reopened the insecurities he had carried since childhood. She had been the one person who understood his sensitivity as strength rather than weakness. Losing her felt like losing the anchor that had kept him steady for decades. The funeral, watched by more than 4 billion people worldwide, was overwhelming. Edward stood beside his grieving siblings, but his sorrow was as much about his own identity as it was about his love for the Queen. The palace felt different, and he felt exposed. After her death, the emotional weight of life in the monarchy, the pressures he had quietly absorbed since childhood, returned with full force, and this time he could no longer push it away. It was not anger or fear but pressure, and that pressure reached a breaking point during a recent private meeting of the royal family, forcing Edward to confront the long-buried struggles and doubts that had quietly shaped his entire life. The tension in the room was almost tangible as Edward entered the private family meeting. The scent of polished wood and worn carpet evoking memories of quiet hours he had spent wandering the palace corridors as a child, silently observing the world around him. The public's concern about the royal family had been mounting, making it crucial to project unity, yet beneath the surface, frustration simmered. Edward felt the weight settle on him even before the meeting began. King Charles spoke first, his words careful and deliberate, emphasizing unity, discipline, and the need to guard the family's image against even the smallest misstep. Appearances mattered more than anything else. When Prince William spoke, he echoed the same themes: control, perfection, restraint, and the importance of an unblemished public image. Every sentence reminded Edward that the family had long been trained to value optics over honesty, appearance over peace. Prince Harry was absent, a silent presence that spoke volumes, and Edward noticed the worry etched into King Charles's face. Each remark about unity felt hollow, and then came the moment that finally cracked Edward's carefully held calm. Charles, in his measured tone, declared that some royal relationships were beyond repair. The words struck Edward like a physical blow, shifting something inside him. Years as a quiet observer, coping with inner storms and personal frustrations, had not prepared him for this declaration that certain connections were no longer worth protecting. In that instant, Edward felt an urgent need to respond, and what he said next stunned the entire family, leaving the room in shocked silence. Drawing on a rare and profound courage, Edward spoke with emotional honesty, articulating feelings that had long been buried. He emphasized the necessity of acknowledging one's emotions rather than masking them beneath perfection, and highlighted the family's relentless obsession with appearances, exposing the toll it had taken on relationships and individual well-being. For the first time, Edward openly challenged the family, confronting the rigid structures, unspoken rules, and emotional coldness that had governed their interactions for decades. He spoke with calm intensity, yet every word carried a weight that shook the room. King Charles, accustomed to commanding every discussion, blinked rapidly in visible surprise. Prince William, ever composed, straightened in his seat, suddenly aware that the usual order had been disrupted. And Camilla, the Duchess, looked down, caught between courtesy and discomfort, unsure how to respond. Edward's speech went further, revealing the hidden toll of life within palace walls. The burden of performing flawless behavior while silently carrying emotional pain. He recalled moments of observing family fractures in silence and longing for warmth, understanding, and real human connection. His words were confessions rather than accusations, a raw expression of truths long held inside. As he finished, the impact was evident. Even Charles, normally unshakable, seemed momentarily unsettled. William stared in stunned silence, and Camilla remained tense. Edward had not intended to shock them. He simply could no longer hide the truth. Feeling the weight of their reactions, he quietly left the room and wandered the palace corridors, letting the echoes of his words resonate. In a quiet, nearly hidden room, he noticed a letter lying on a polished desk, its thick paper and careful handwriting unmistakably the Queen's. Unlike her usual formal letters, this one carried a warmth and presence that reminded him of her voice and wisdom. She wrote of the importance of protecting the heart of the family, nurturing unity through real emotional connection rather than appearances, and of true strength being measured not by perfection, but by empathy, understanding, and the courage to speak honestly. Reading her words, Edward felt quiet reassurance. The Queen had entrusted him with a vital responsibility, to be a bridge for the family, a steady and empathetic presence amid rigidity and withdrawal. He realized that the courage he had shown that day was only the beginning. Protecting the family's heart would require constant effort, patience, resilience, and continued honesty. It would demand speaking, listening, nurturing, and enduring discomfort, an ongoing commitment to keep the emotional bonds intact.